and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here. My name is Kim Menninger, and I'm a women's leadership coach. I started this podcast because as a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome and a coach who sees this in 98% of the women I meet, I wanted to take this conversation to a bigger stage, so to speak. Imposter syndrome is triggered by a lot of things, but two of the primary triggers are transitions and feeling different from those around us. Women in traditionally male-dominated environments experience these triggers on an almost daily basis, so it's only natural that we would feel this way. What compounds these feelings is the sense that we are alone. The belief that if we share our feelings, we'll expose our incompetence even further. So we carry it around like a deep, dark secret. I started this podcast because I want to put a stop to this nonsense and destigmatize imposter syndrome. Because we don't talk about it, we look around and assume that everyone around us has it all figured out, that we're somehow the exception to the rule, when in reality, we're all feeling this way. And when we can own that and say it out loud, we all benefit. Nobody more so than you. So thanks again for being here. If you enjoy it, please share it with others who might also benefit. Welcome, Natalie. I am so excited to have you here today, and I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about you.
Hey, Kim, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be talking to you today as well. I'm happy to share a little bit about myself. My name is Natalie Garramone. I am an upstate New Yorker, currently living in Richmond, Virginia. I have been here for the past 11 or so years. The work that I do is workplace conflict resolution and mediation, so I'm a certified mediator. And my background over the past decade or so has been in organizational development, change management, and culture strategy consulting. So it's been an interesting journey to get where I am today, but I'm really excited to be here.
I'm really excited that you're here having this conversation with me today. And I'd love to start just by getting a sense of what imposter syndrome means to you and how, if at all, has it shown up in your life or in your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. In preparing for my conversation with you, I was like, let me look up the definition of imposter syndrome, and just to make sure it is what I think in my mind it is. And in my mind, the word that I feel like comes to mind so quickly for me is fraud, and actually it showed up in the definition as well. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not too far off on this. And it is, I think it has shown up for me over the years in exactly that way. This feeling of maybe a little bit less than, feeling like supposed to be here, but then followed quickly by a question of whether or not that's actually true, without usually any indication from anyone around me that might even be the case. So that has really been, that's really been a lot of it for me. And then of course that feeling that, well, surely someone's going to realize that I'm not, insert whatever it is, the right person for this job, the right person for this award, that it was supposed to be someone else who was supposed to be in this place, but not me, surely. But then it doesn't happen, and it just kind of perpetuates for no good reason. So that's how it's kind of shown up for me in my life.
Yeah, I think that perfectly captures how I think about imposter syndrome too, is that sense of just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Right?
Yes.
Pretty soon, someone's going to figure out that I'm not who they think I am.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm curious, because I know that you are now a business owner. Mm-hmm. Have you always run your own business? Have you worked for others in the past?
Yeah, I have. This is my first time. I kind of joke that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I never intended to work for myself. I really love and have loved working on teams, and just really never envisioned myself owning a business and working for myself. That said, I have really been enjoying it for a number of reasons. But up until now, or up until I should say, I've been working out on my own for the past 2 years, a little over 2 years. But prior to that, I worked at two different consulting firms, both relatively small in size, but still with other people, for other people, and quite enjoyed it, and really did enjoy that.
Have you noticed, and incidentally, before I ask you the next question, I want to just echo what you said, because I feel like that's been my experience too, is I never imagined myself being an entrepreneur. So I love how you said accidental entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that. I'll credit you, but I'm going to use that.
Take it. I'm sure it's not mine to be. I'm sure I heard it somewhere else too. I just don't remember where, but I've been saying it for a while. It's very fitting, no?
It really is. I love it. But I'm curious, as you think about your own journey with imposter syndrome, if you've noticed anything about how it showed up when you were working in those consulting firms versus how it's shown up as an entrepreneur. Are there any differences or themes that you've seen?
Yeah. So what's funny is I feel less of an imposter now than I had previously. And don't get me wrong, I have days when I am 24 hours an imposter, but previously, I'll share a little bit of my kind of career story. So I moved to Richmond, Virginia from upstate New York about 11 or so years ago. I started working at a small HR consulting firm, and there was a great gap of experience between me and the partners and some of the other consultants there. So I was constantly kind of in this mindset of trying to move up, but there weren't too many steps to move up. And so that was its own experience in and of itself. But then someone passed along a job description for another consulting firm here in Richmond. And it was a kind of relatively new, I came on as employee number 10. I made the decision to switch jobs. It felt like a better fit. It felt like work that was more aligned with what I was interested in. And by the way, I had no intention of ever going into consulting. I wanted to be a corporate attorney. And so that was a whole new world of learning and understanding for me that I ended up quite enjoying, and obviously sticking with. But at the time I was kind of like, all right, let me, get this experience. I'll check it out. It will be a great opportunity. It would be a great next move to continue developing my career. And I came in, I was like maybe employee number 10. It was very early on. And what happened over the span of about almost 7 years is that I went from that entry-level consultant role to the CEO position of the consulting services divisions. It was a family-owned business. I had lots of opportunities to work closely with the owners and founders, and really was able to understand every angle of the business until one day they said they were ready to kind of hand off the reins to someone else. Which was, absolutely mind-blowing for me. And I knew I did great work, and I knew I had great relationships, and I knew clients liked me. But to be trusted to run a business, especially a family-owned business, I think is a really special and unique thing. And so part of me felt so immensely qualified, and part of me was like, who do you think you are? And it's funny, to this day, I will sometimes in a half self-deprecating tone, but refer to it as my big fancy CEO title, because it was a big fancy CEO title. And sometimes there are just so many emotions and things that get tied up into a title and a role and the work. And I think a lot of me back then was very much struggling with imposter syndrome. I felt very grateful and worthy, and at the same time never felt like I was doing enough, or that, constantly wondering, am I the right person for this? Why me? And when will they discover that it shouldn't be me?
Do you recall yourself doing anything intentional to manage those feelings? Were there things that you found to help you work through some of that self-doubt?
Well, thinking back on it, if I did, it wasn't terribly intentional. I don't think that I was in as I don't think I was in a place of as deep of self-awareness as I am now. And I credit much of I don't by any means think I'm some like totally enlightened being. I'm not. I believe that learning is, a continuous journey and evolution. And I don't even call myself an expert, because I feel like calling yourself an expert, and maybe this is my imposter syndrome, Kim, you'll have to tell me, but I feel like calling myself an expert almost lends itself to the idea that I don't have much more learning to do. But back then, I'll say, several years ago, I don't know that I intentionally sought out people or conversations or experiences to debunk my imposter syndrome. I did do a lot of, I tried to do things like meditation, and I had a yoga practice, and I got into running. And so I found kind of outlets to release my energy or spend time in my own head to maybe better understand why I was feeling the things that I did. And then I obviously, with close friends and family, would open up and say, why do I feel this way? Or am I the right person for this? And of course, people are kind and generous and truthful when you're talking to the right people, and assured me that I was. And I should say I had a great relationship with the people who own the business. And so in some instances, I would actually open up with them and say, and be very honest about questions or concerns that I had. And so it was a very good relationship in that way too, where I did feel like I could bring those things up in a way that we could have a real conversation about them.
I think that's such a great strategy in and of itself. And of course, like you said, it really depends on the nature of the relationship and the amount of trust that's there. But I find that so much of our feelings of self-doubt and this whole experience of imposter syndrome stems from our inability to talk about it out loud. And we make certain assumptions, and we don't get the reassurance or the information that we need to reframe some of that thinking. And so your ability to just put it out there on the table with these owners, or, the family, probably gave you a lot of reassurance that, oh, okay, maybe I didn't know the answer to that question, but now I do, and I can move forward much more confidently.
Yes. And to borrow that phrase, putting it out on the table, it's actually a phrase that I use a lot, coincidentally, in my work now. Now I'm in the business as a mediator of having conversations. I encourage people, you have to talk about it in order to solve it. And I think that is exactly true of imposter syndrome too, right? If it's in your head, if it exists in your mind, there's something about it that makes it almost, it's real, but it's not. And so once you put it out there and you verbalize it, you put words to it, or even write it down on a piece of paper, you can start working with it and through it in a different way.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm curious how much of your work, the work that you do now, has helped your own experience with imposter syndrome, because I can certainly say from my experience that just having these conversations with other women, having done so much of the research in order to be a support system to other people, has helped me to grow tremendously. And you talked about, your role as a mediator, or helping people to work through conflict. Has that had an impact on your own confidence?
Yeah, yes, it has. I mean, from in the most tactical sense, it's given me a concrete set of tools going through my certification as a Supreme Court certified mediator in Virginia. Has been a lengthy but worthwhile process, in that it's given me so many tools to help people have these conversations in a way that is truly productive and constructive, maybe even first with themselves, right? Because that is so much of what I do is helping people work through difficult situations where many times another person is involved, but you have to almost understand your own feelings and challenges with a topic, with a situation, with where you've been previously, with data points around that issue, and then of course with that person. But it's really given me in a tactical sense some tools to help have those conversations on a personal level. I think I have just learned so much about myself throughout the journey of kind of quote unquote accidentally working for myself. And it has given me a different level of confidence than I had before. And I dare I say a true sense of confidence. When I first started kind of branching out on my own, I was having lots of coffees and conversations with people, and they said, wow, you seem really at ease. You seem very confident in a different way. And to me, that was the biggest sign that something in me had settled. And I did have, again, I still have those days where I'm like, am I, really the person who's up here on a stage and talking to people and sharing ideas? Or is this not right? Someone else should be doing this. Someone is going to realize that I'm not the real deal. But so I still have those days, but through so many conversations with people where they acknowledged that I seemed more peaceful, seemed more confident, seemed just at ease with who I was, that to me was a massive indicator that I was doing something right, and that some things had been kind of unrattled, if you will, throughout that process within me.
I love going back to what you said before about this idea of of thinking of ourselves as an expert, and that kind of closing down the need to learn anything else. I also think that when we think of ourselves as experts, we put so much pressure on ourselves to know everything, to be able to anticipate every possible question, every angle of a conversation. And this is going to sound funny, but as an entrepreneur, one of the things that I have learned is that you don't have to know everything. You just have to know a little bit more than the people that you're serving, right? You have to know whatever the relevant piece is that might be missing from that situation. And so it's very fair to be in a particular situation with others and still learning yourself, right? You don't have to have all of the answers to be able to facilitate a conversation or to be able to guide somebody else through something. And if we take that pressure off of ourselves, it minimizes the chances that we're going to have that sense of, oh no, I'm a fraud.
Absolutely right. I mean, and I think you've completely nailed it, which is, it shuts down the opportunity to learn. It almost positions you as not needing to learn anywhere because you've reached this pinnacle of understanding about XYZ topic. But that second piece of what you said, I think, is so critical and does show up so much in my work as well, where yes, as entrepreneurs, as subject matter experts in a particular area, whether it's leadership development or women's experiences or conflict resolution, you're being called because you have, or called upon rather, because you have an outside perspective to a situation. And I think if you break down expertise into merely an outside perspective, someone that isn't as close to a situation as the people going through it, that's where the real value is. Because, and I know especially in my work, I would imagine sometimes in your work too, the person going through the thing, the situation, the challenge, the conversation, the difficult issue, whatever, they are so entrenched in a perspective of that situation that is rightfully their own. But there are also so many emotions tied into that, and so many other things tied into it that really need to be uncovered. And sometimes it's easier just for someone from the outside to say, hey, let's put a fresh lens on this. I don't know all of the details, but here's my first glance at this situation, and let's work backwards from there. It can just be really helpful. And if you go in not thinking that there's anything to learn, or that all you have to give is advice versus more question asking or uncovering, I think it can be a really really challenging for everyone. And then finally, I've loved that you said about the pressure. I think that's probably, maybe selfishly, all these years I've not called myself an expert because I just don't want to put the pressure on myself, because my gosh, to live up to that every day. I mean, it sounds wonderful and fancy, but I don't know that I would. It is a lot of pressure to call yourself an expert and to feel like you have to live up to that. And so maybe that's the real reason I haven't called myself an expert.
Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly about being an outside perspective too. I mean, a lot of the kinds of things that we're talking about don't have standard definitions. I mean, we're not talking about things that are precisely technical in nature where there's an equation that you can solve, right? We're talking about human psychology and the ways that people interact. And so and just to add to that, I think that's true of a lot of business in general. I think that's true of so many of us working in business environments right now, is that there often isn't one right answer. So we have this expectation that we have to perfectly navigate these environments as though there is, again, an equation to solve, right? And in doing so, we create this very high standard for ourselves that's unachievable. And I think that's a lot of where this comes from.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. Yes.
I have a question for you too, because you mentioned the questions that we can be asking ourselves too in the context of the mediation that you do. And I just find that so many of us are sleepwalking through life. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just think that there's so much going on in our lives that we're not asking deeper questions. We're not really spending time to examine our beliefs, to think about why we feel or think certain things. And I'm curious if you have any tips for people who, maybe outside of a specific conflict or outside of a specific situation in which you would typically engage, could help people just to be a little bit more intentional or self-reflective about themselves.
Yeah, I think maybe so appropriately, right before our call, I was reading something that a colleague and friend of mine wrote and shared on LinkedIn, and he titled it Uncorked, and he's a Black man living in Richmond, Virginia. Is a former client of mine. We've known each other for a long time, but in reading it, he detailed some of his, a lot of his experiences and perspectives and traumas as a Black man living in America. And I thought to myself, wow, you know someone, but how well do you really know them? And I think that we go through, to your point, we go through life having conversations with people, especially people who do work in corporate environments. We see each other from 9 to 5 or some variation of that, and we have conversations. And so often they are surface level. And I realize there have to be some sort of boundaries between personal and professional in many cases, to just kind of protect people and their just not blending too much into work and life. But I've had this idea that, we know people, but we don't really know people. And I think so much of that translates into what we're talking about, because on the surface, if you chatted with me 7 years ago or however many years ago, you would leave that conversation and say, my gosh, she is so confident. Look, she just won these awards. Look, she must have everything she wants. And she's, probably doesn't have a doubt about her abilities in the world. And that would be entirely untrue. But we don't often give each other the space, and we don't often give ourselves the space to sit down and really dig into why, or the layers or the reasons that contribute to our mindsets and our emotions around a particular issue, or around a lifetime of issues that have maybe been bottled up in the case of my friend. And I thought about, as it relates to the work that I do, I think I talk a lot about self-awareness, and in a micro situation where there is, let's say, a difficult conversation between one person and another, the first thing I ask people to do typically is to say, take out a sheet of paper and without judging yourself, write down the conversation you'd like to have from your perspective. If you were to just let it all out, even if there is years of judgment or situations built up that haven't been addressed, just let it all out. And the reason I ask people to do this is because we don't talk about a lot of stuff. We have sort of, I say, usually we've been conditioned to be polite in our work environments, and that is appropriate to a certain extent. But when it comes to equipping ourselves with the tools and abilities to handle difficult conversations, and we are facing so much of that right now. We're having so many important conversations, but many of us are not equipped to have those conversations because we have so much tied up personally in them, emotions, our own experiences. But I ask people to take out a piece of paper and almost lay it all out, if you will, to borrow your phrase, put it all on the table. And then I ask them to comb through what they've written down and really examine it. What pieces feel accurate? What pieces are more factual versus more emotional? How can they have this conversation in a way that is more constructive? But that first exercise really is kind of letting it all out. And I think that is one of the questions to ask ourselves is, what is the non-judgmental version of this story that I can write down for myself? Or what is the version of the story that I can write down and capture without judgment, all of it, kind of word vomit on a page, and use it as a tool to understand where I'm really coming from, whether it's within your own mind or with in a conversation with another person.
I love that so much, because I do think that we have to get clarity on our own thoughts and feelings first before we can ever effectively communicate or deeply communicate, as you're describing, with other people. Yes. I think we get a false sense of clarity when we kind of look at the swirling thoughts in our head and think that we know how they fit together. But there's something really powerful about translating that into writing that crystallizes it in such a more effective way. So I think that's such a great tip for everybody who may be struggling with how they feel about something, how to articulate something, how to move forward on something. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I would say for people, sometimes writing is very daunting for some people. The other suggestion I would have is open up a voice memo on your phone and just start talking, like just let it all come out, and then, listen to it and see if you can hear yourself and how you're talking about the particular thing that, that you're examining or preparing to have a conversation about, et cetera.
I mean, it's really the closest we will ever get to any form of objectivity in our own thinking, right?
Exactly.
Kind of read it from the outside as opposed to thinking on the inside. That's so great. So what motivated you to want to tell your story today, and what are you hoping people will take away from it?
I mean, I think for me, part of it is exactly what we've been talking about, right? Is putting words to my own experience and putting it out there in the world for people to hear and to know that the surface is sometimes just that, the surface. For someone once described themselves, I believe, as the most confident and simultaneously insecure person. And I was like, wow, that's exactly how I feel too. And I think we all struggle with our own varying levels of confidence and insecurity. And sometimes it happens all in one day, and sometimes it happens over the span of months or years. But I think I want people, in hearing my story, one, to know that titles and awards are great, and there's also so much more to someone's career journey or personal journey that I think, especially now, maybe more than ever, it is our responsibility as human beings to take time to uncover and understand, because there's so much more that people are dealing with. And when we take the time to do that, it can help us be better colleagues, better family members, better parents, you name it, and just better people all around.
I love that, Natalie. Thank you so much. I have so enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm so grateful
Thank
to you.
Kim. Yes, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed speaking with you too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.